Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's presentation. My name is Amanda, and I'm one of your registered dietitians here at the Stony Brook World Trade Center Health and Wellness Program. So today we're going to go over a few things. Our presentation is going to cover the topic of portion control. However, we're going to go into a little bit about the hormones and mechanisms of portion control, and then go more into tips for managing our portions, right? So let's start off. Let's go over a few key terms. So hunger, right? Hunger is that physiological need. It's that discomfort, the growls, the hunger pangs, the contractions that we get from our stomach, coupled with a desire and a need to go and eat food, right? The lack of food can cause hunger. Appetite, however, is more of that natural desire to satisfy a bodily need, especially for food. So it's how hungry we are, or if we have a lack of appetite, for example. And then a craving is more so a powerful desire to go get something. And that, oh, I'm craving something sweet. Let me go get something, even though I might not necessarily be hungry, right? We can be craving, but not be hungry. Also, some important pieces to go into is some hormones that we're not limited to, however, there are more that impact our control for food intake, right? That impact maybe too much calories coming in or not enough calories coming in. So we have leptin, right? Leptin is more of what you call a satiating hormone, right? So our body fat is supposed to produce leptin, which it does. And the more leptin that we produce, typically it means that we have more body fat, right? So signaling to our brain that we have enough calories, we can utilize the body fat, our appetite doesn't need to be so much, we're not so hungry, right? Sometimes you see what's called leptin resistance in individuals where because there's so much leptin being produced by the fat cells that the receptor in the brain kind of becomes blunted to a constant stimulus for leptin. You also have your pancreas, right? So your pancreas makes insulin. Insulin in the brain reduces food intake, and food intake consequently increases until body weight and the insulin signal is restored, right? Conversely, when an individual overindulges to the point of gaining body weight, the insulin signal will increase, reducing food intake until weight is lost, right? So that's what's supposed to happen. And then ghrelin, think like a little gremlin that's growling, right? It's the opposite hormone to leptin, which just signals that we're hungry and need to eat. There's other hormones. Another one, for example, is our incretin hormones, which are made by the bugs in our gut, and they communicate up to our brain to say, "Hey, I'm full. I don't need any carbs. I'm satiated." So that's those new GLP-1 medications that you might be seeing, like the Ozempic, Wegovy, Manjaro, for example, Rybelsus, target these incretin hormones so that the person doesn't feel full and the person doesn't feel hungry. And because the person is not so hungry and that instead they're satiated, they eat less calories, right? And therefore lose weight. So, like we said, there's some treatments, which you'll see here below, like those medications. But many of us have heard the theory that our genes load the gun, but our environment pulls the trigger, right? So that's in relation to weight for some, but it also plays off this concept called the set point theory. So the set point theory is that, my body weight is, say, 140, and because I'm at 140, my body wants to try to maintain homeostasis at that weight and will fight me. So if I cut back my calories too much, maybe my metabolic rate will slow down to help me to maintain that weight. Or if I increase my calories too much, that my metabolic rate might increase, right? That's the thought of the set point theory. Your body is always trying to maintain homeostasis is the point to drive home, and sees that weight as maybe cushion for catastrophe. God forbid something happens, there's some reserve to pull from. So we talked about altered level of hormones can also disrupt our ability to maintain a healthy weight sometimes and portion. Something like we also said, though, it's the environment, right? So our environment is the invisible hand that feeds us, meaning we are who we bring ourselves around, right? Social cues. Maybe someone's office has less or more sugary treats around than others. Eating environment, right? Do we have spousal support at home? Are kids more mindful eaters? What about our grandchildren? So sometimes who we're exposed to can really affect us. Reasons for eating, maybe our connection with food, how we grew up. Maybe we were shamed for eating certain foods, or were raised to have a healthy relationship with our food. That all plays a part. And then, of course, sleep quality is a big piece too, because our hypothalamus tells us, hey, I'm hungry, hey, I'm thirsty, hey, I'm tired. And sometimes those communication lines get crossed, that it's been estimated that people increase their calories by about 270 calories a day when they're sleep deprived, typically from what I call like your dopamine hitters, like saturated fat and sugar. So checking in with sleep as an environmental trigger for increased portions if we're not getting enough. And then, of course, there's different treatments, right? So we talked about those medications. There's bariatric surgery. Exercise can help to control appetite in some. Medical nutrition therapy, which is meeting with a registered dietitian. So all Stony Brook, first and foremost, all Stony Brook WTC responders have access to one-on-one nutrition counseling with us here, and it's completely complimentary and covered as part of you being a member. So of course, counseling, medical nutrition therapy, and working on making healthy lifestyle changes can all make this possible. But something that we must note is that it is complicated, right? It's not, yes, it's calories in, calories out, help us to lose weight, but there's so much that impact. What are those calories going in and those calories coming out? So you can see here on the left in green, some people's appetite is different, right? Maybe their hormones are a little different, controlling their appetite. The type of food consumed, right? What are they brought around? Are they sleep deprived? Are they shift workers? Maybe their level of education around food choices or socioeconomic status. Maybe they're maybe going to Whole Foods is not as accessible for some. And then, of course, culture, status, and taste preference can all impact that. Calories absorbed. Some people don't absorb as much than others, right? Or some people have different microbiomes that can impact absorption. Psychological factors, stress, if someone's a stress eater, or if they have, altered mindset in relation to food, and that like, I'm stressed, I need to go eat this cookie to relieve my stress, and there's nothing else that can help to satisfy my need. That could be a mindset. Perceived ability to control oneself. Oh, I can't control myself right now. I have my family member to bring Oreos in the house, right? Some people feel a greater control in that setting versus others. Self-esteem, and again, going back to sleep quality. In the red is factors that influence energy out. Energy out could be how much someone burns in a day, not just the level of physical activity. Maybe they participate in a very active job, or maybe on a very small level, they're a fidgeter, right? Like people who tend to always be touching something, moving, they burn a small amount of calories throughout the day, right? Maybe their hormones are different. Maybe they're a young male with lots of testosterone versus a postmenopausal female. And then, of course, relationship with exercise for some, and energy burned by metabolizing food, right? How processed the foods are that the person tends to eat. So there's so many factors, and it's really important to analyze that each of us are individuals, and we all need our own individualized treatment. Other components that can impact our nutrient intake, like we talked about, there's certain nutrient deficiencies, right? Like if those who are sleep deprived tend to eat more saturated fat and sugar, like we touched upon. Overall psychological restriction can also lead to overeating. If I tell myself, don't eat, don't eat, don't eat, by the time that hunger is going to rear its ugly head, it's going to be more likely to cause a binge, right? If I don't eat all throughout the day, skip breakfast, maybe eat like a little something throughout lunch, come home from work and binge on snacks and then wonder why, we're so hungry. That's a common situation we see. In terms of nutrient deficiencies, people have protein deficiency that leads to less stomach acid and less cravings for protein. Also, it's really important to note that if someone's not getting a balance of nutrients in their diet, like protein's the most satiating nutrient. So we should be aiming to really try to have that most meals or snacks to help hold us over, along with fibrous carbs. But we will build upon that and get to that more so when we get into steps for portioning. Carbohydrate restriction. If someone's not on a keto diet, which we don't recommend, and they're running off glucose and they're not getting enough of quote unquote like the good carbs, fruits, vegetables, whole grains, beans, and legumes, their body's going to still crave glucose, right? So they're more apt to have sweet cravings if they're not getting carbs from other sources. And lastly, studies show that those who eat too much sodium or not enough sodium may crave salt, right? So it's all important to notice our own individual needs. And not to say it just comes down to willpower, right? Like I hate it when people say that, I'm gonna be honest, because I feel like it's a superficial cop-out. By superficial, I mean it's just very surface level. Like I'm not gonna think a lot deeper. I'm not gonna put much time to it. I'm just gonna say, all right, I just gotta do better next time. I gotta wait for willpower. It's not really action oriented, and it's not really reflecting back on, well, what's going good, what's not going well, what specific things do I need to do to get towards my goal. So we need to plan, right? Fail to prepare, prepare to fail. And we can't just will ourselves into doing something. If we plan things in advance, like meals or how we want to time things, or really just kind of consider this to be more of a priority for some, we're less likely to just will ourselves through it, and we're more likely to fall into a plan. I.e., if I have exercise scheduled and maybe I have a friend that I have it planned with, I'm going to be more likely to go than if I just walk out of work and say, all right, I think I'm going to go home, get my gym bag or get changed, then go to the gym. Less likely to achieve that goal of going to the gym versus having a time, a friend plan to meet, maybe having our gym bag packed. So just that little bit of habitual planning can make a big difference. So those kind of themes you'll see talked about in this book, Atomic Habits by James Clear. It's a book that Katie and I love to recommend, whether it's in audio form or in written form. We see a lot of our patients do get a lot from this, and we do use a lot of the information on habit creation in our nutrition counseling. So it's just noting your willpower will never outweigh the environment, and it's that we have to try to change our environment ever so slowly to help us to achieve our goals. Thought this was just fascinating to look at, 1950s portion sizes to now, and checking in this growth and what do we truly need versus what do we want, and understanding that this is going on, just so that maybe we can better prepare ourselves in meal selection and understanding that we determine our portion size, not necessarily the restaurant, right? Next is how much should I eat, right? All of us are different. Things that determine how much, like our calorie needs per day, is our age, our current weight and height, our individual metabolism, how much muscle we have on our body, for example, our level of physical activity, our gender, are all important pieces to acknowledge. Of course, members who come in and use our Tanita body composition scale will get a basal metabolic rate recorded, and also working with a registered dietitian can help to get accurate needs calculated for you, so we can set ourselves up for realistic outcomes and achieving our goals. Next is maybe monitoring our food intake in like a food tracking app, or being mindful about our calories to stay under. I know it sounds old school to say calories in, calories out. It is a big piece of it. However, we will not lose weight unless we are in a calorie deficit. So when you're logging in like an app like a MyFitnessPal, I love the Lose It app, My Net Diary, Chronometer, just to name a few. You're noting your meal timing, you're noting where you're eating, what you're eating, how much you're eating, and it helps to analyze patterns and notice things that are happening. And most importantly, if I bite it, I write it. So it helps to create that added thought. If I want to have this food, I really need to make sure that it's in my goals and it's what I really want. I'm just not, grabbing a piece of candy from the candy bowl without even thinking as I'm walking by. So some more steps to help with portion control is first, like, we don't want to get hangry, right? So I'm going to first, before going into these bullets, skip ahead to this slide, right? So this is our hunger fullness scale. You want to see over here on the far left, ravenous, dizzy, nauseous, physically ill, shaky. That's like a 1, right? And then all the way on the other end, like binge, fullness, sickness, I call it Thanksgiving full. That's like a 10, right? I'm stuffed. I can't eat anymore. So the closer I get to a 1, the more likely I am to end at a 10, right? Because if I'm starving, Marvin, I'm more likely to eat faster. Because I'm eating faster, my vagus nerve doesn't have as much time to tell my brain, hey, I'm full. So portions are more likely to go up. And then we also call it getting a case of the effort. It's been so long since I've eaten something, I can have what I want because I'm in a calorie deficit. But it's still about the quality of the nutrients coming in for our food. So this kind of situation can make it a little treacherous for those trying to achieve weight loss related goals. So you want to see hungry, stomach growling as like a 3. I could eat is like a 4. So you want to start eating when we're at like a 3 or a 4, that first onset of hunger, right? And by doing that, you have to go inward and say, what does hunger feel like for me? Is it my stomach growling, lightheaded, dizziness, versus what does a craving feel like for me? So I can best tell when I need to feed my body, right? And then we want to end at like a satisfied. I call that like a 7. It says where if you could eat more, you'd feel uncomfortable. So the closer you start eating to a 3, the more likely you are to end at a 7. And that pace of eating slows down. Our choices tend to be better because we're less in that like depraved sense of I need food now, I'm so hungry. And it's more likely to lead us to better portioning. So we want to try to eat small snacks 2 to 3 hours before mealtime, or overall, I try to get you guys on a schedule of eating breakfast, lunch, dinner, 1 to 2 snacks. So essentially you're eating every 3 to 5 hours, preventing you from getting to that one ravenous, but still allowing you to not be eating all throughout the day because that's not good either. We want to eat, like we said, when we're slightly hungry, not starving. It's called har hashibu. It's a Japanese expression for almost like 80-20. Leave a little something on your plate instead of finishing the whole plate to prevent us from getting uncomfortably full. We want to avoid skipping meals because if I skip lunch, for example, and eat breakfast, if I eat breakfast, skip lunch, and then expect dinner to be great, I'm going to be starving Marvin going into that meal, and I'm kind of setting myself up for a sticky situation. And then we want to snack wisely. Like when we do snack, it's okay to have a snack. They're tools. But we want to try to make sure we're having a high fiber carb, like a fruit or a vegetable, for example, or like a bean, right? That's a great high fiber, with a protein or a healthy fat. So maybe doing some bell peppers with some black bean dip or some hard-boiled eggs, maybe with some avocado on some whole grain toast. That'd be a great little snack. Next, we want to talk about slowing down. Like I said, as you eat and drink, your stomach fills, activating these stretch receptors in the stomach to send satiety messages up to the brain through the vagus nerve to say, hey, I'm full. But like we were saying, it takes time. It takes like 15 to 20 minutes for the stomach to tell the brain, hey, I'm full. So that's why the Mediterranean meal table is one of the cornerstones of the Mediterranean diet, because if you're eating with loved ones, you're sharing stories, you're having maybe gratitude towards the food we're eating, hey, Jim, you did a great job on the meatballs. How'd you make them? And then we're learning, sharing ideas, and most importantly, having fun and slowing down while we're eating. Next is, what can we do though? Other tips besides, talking to Jim about how we made the meatballs, I'm just kidding, our other family members around the table, is turn off all distractors. Because if my mind and my time and attention is placed onto, say, a screen like a TV or my phone, then I'm less likely to be going inside and taking time or mindfulness to know, okay, am I full? Am I craving? Where am I at right now? Am I stuffed? What number am I on the scale? So I like to have that hunger fullness chart sometimes on the fridge. Some things that also work is putting our fork down in between bites to slow down, and of course maybe playing some light music to feel more at ease and low stress. Some ways to balance our plate, right? Because it's all about a balance of nutrients, in that if I have a food in my meal that doesn't have protein, healthy fat, or fiber, there's not much slowing it down, right? So fiber slows down digestion, but not enough by itself, right? That's like an apple juice compared to an apple. I'm going to feel more full if I eat an apple versus apple juice because now I have more fiber, right? It's the same concept as like white bread to whole grain bread. However, I still need protein or healthy fat if it's a meal, both together, to feel full because they're bigger molecules. So that acid in the stomach has to take time to break that down. So it's going to take a little longer for that food to go from the stomach to the small intestine, and really help you to be held over from one meal to the next. So it allows for that meal timing like we talked about of breakfast, lunch, dinner, and 1 to 2 snacks. So some best ways to do this is the USDA My Plate. So 1/4 of your plate is about protein. For most people, typically at least 20 grams of protein. And I know this plate is awesome. It's Canada's version, actually. The reason why we went with it is people eat with their eyes. There's a whole bunch of examples of foods that fit into each space. However, there are some things I'm going to touch upon. So in your protein section, if you're not a vegan or a vegetarian, this is where we really want it to be, like your chicken, your turkey, your fish. You want to aim for proteins that swim, fly, grow from the ground, or like we said, eat grass to connote like grass-fed beef, maybe twice a week or less. The other category, the 1/4 below it, that's like your starches. That's supposed to be like your beans, although beans have protein, but we're going to count them as a starch. That's going to be like your beans, your whole grains, your starchy vegetables, which include peas, corn, potatoes, sweet potatoes, and squash. Squash gets like a little asterisk because spaghetti squash, zucchini, summer squash, although in that family, they're non-starchy. So all the other vegetables I didn't say, and those 3 squashes, you can eat as much of them as you'd like, and that would make up half your plate. So note that on the Canadian My Plate, you'll see some peas and sweet potatoes, but really they belong in the starchy section. And by having vegetables on the plate, it takes up space in our stomach, right? So because I had the vegetables at the meal, I'm going to eat less of the fat or the protein or the starches. So I'm going to take in less calories. So vegetables are super important from that standpoint, but also because they're what you call nutrient rich, but they're not energy dense, meaning that they're low in calories, but high in nutrients. So get them while they're hot. Portion versus serving size. So serving size is what's really listed on the nutrition facts label. Portions, just to be like in a summarized format, is just to say is what you end up portioning and putting on your plate. How to determine the size of the portion. So this, you can always pause the video as you're going through it and really take a peek. So 1 apple, 1 orange, 2 clementines, a half a banana. Those are all 1 serving of fruit. Typically, it's about 3/4 cup if you're uncertain. And same with vegetables. It's about ½ cup cooked or 1 cup raw equals 1 serving of a vegetable. Carbs are very unique to the individual. Typically say about a ½ a cup per person, but really working with a registered dietitian to determine your individual portion needs are essential. Typically, it's going to be about 45 to about 65, or I should say about 30 to 65 grams of carbs in a meal would be about a typical portion size, depending on the size and activity level of the person and all those other factors we talked about earlier in determining energy needs. Fat's typically about a tablespoon per person. The food label, of course, you could always see at the top of the food label here at number 1, the serving size, which is not necessarily the portion size. So you would use that to determine how much you would eat. In general, sticking to the serving size is never a bad idea, however. So we were talking about energy density a second ago. So energy dense foods are foods high in calories. They're typically ultra processed, which means they're typically low in fiber, low in nutrients, right? So that's like our processed snacks like Cheez-Its or Lay's or certain takeout foods like McDonald's. They have a high calorie per gram, but they tend to be also low in essential nutrients and high in saturated fat and sugar. Where less energy dense foods, or what you call nutrient dense foods, are more like your fruits, your vegetables, your meats, things that grow, real food, right? Like we should be eating real foods, chicken, turkey, fish, beans, nuts, fruits, vegetables, foods that grow and come from the earth. They tend to be more satisfying and have less chemicals in them as well, because they're less processed. Calorie density matters. So this image shows you a portion size of all foods that are about 100 calories. So you can see the less processed the food is, the more fibers in it, the more nutrients are in it. So that's going to be foods like watermelon, popcorn, edamame, berries, Greek yogurt, versus like the processed foods that, because they're processed, it's a smaller portion size, but same, density of nutrients, right? It's still for that small bit of M&Ms, 100 calories or so versus that couple of cups of broccoli. That's how, if anybody's seen Blue Zones, those in Okinawa, they eat large portions of food, but really what they're eating is a bunch of lean proteins and vegetables with some fat. So that's how they can eat that large volume, but not be a lot of calories, right? So it's less processed. Step 4 would be set yourself up for success, right? Using small bowls and plates, for example. Sit down. If we're eating standing, we're kind of in a fast-paced situation, less mindful. Eat off the plate so you can see the portion, right? Like take it out of the bag and put it onto the plate so we can see what we're actually having. And this sounds kind of funny, but we don't want to treat ourselves like the trash can. And I'm all for repurposing and preventing food waste as much as possible. But with that being said, if I have a leftover cake and I can't try to give it to someone else in need or bring it in and put it in the break room at work or something like that, I'm not going to force myself to eat it just because I know there's starving kids in Africa, that concept. But by me eating it, I'm not doing good for anybody, right? That's not helping anybody. It's better, I got to treat myself with more respect than the trash can. So you're better off kind of tossing it if you can't repurpose it somehow. And be selective about seconds. Finish your meal with fruit rather than maybe a dessert sometimes, especially if it's not something we want and it's just there. We don't need to take things just because it's there. Step 5 is grant yourself permission to eat. It is always okay to eat more food if you are hungry. If you're physically hungry, eat. It is so important. Store any leftovers so you can enjoy it for the next day, right? That helps with meal prep. That's often what I do for my lunches is my leftovers from dinner. I'm not going to force myself to finish dinner just because it's there. And hey, it saves me some time and money down the road. To avoid overeating, I keep the hunger fullness scale out, and I recommend that for patients. I think that's a good tool. And check in with slowing down. Maybe tell a significant other that you eat with, or challenge yourself to maintain their pace if they eat a little slower than us. And most importantly, just in summary, eat food, real food, like we talked about, right? Not too much, and mostly plants, right? Although we condone eating meat, right? It's all about the source it comes from. Most of the diet should still be from plants, right? Fruits, vegetables, whole grains, beans and legumes, nuts and seeds. They are good foods. Olive oil, olives, and they help us to keep full and nourished, most importantly. So thank you guys for listening to the presentation. This was done, of course, as a recording after the fact, after we had already presented, but I wanted to make sure you guys had it in case just to go back to. So note that we do a virtual wellness seminar once a month, and you could find more of our videos on the page that you found this. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye, guys.